Hello, everybody. My name is Candace Prince. I'm with Green Hope Project. We're so happy that you are able to attend this workshop with us. We've really been looking forward to it. So this is the Environmental Roundtable meeting for facilitating collaboration amongst environmental organizations in the border region. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Meghan Curry.
All right, thank you so much, Candy. As she mentioned, my name is Meghan Curry, and I am the director of Insights El Paso Science Center. And thanks to everybody who is joining us today for what is the very first public presentation of our brand new environmental roundtable here in the border region, which you will be learning more about today. We will be hearing from a bit myself, and especially Mr. Gary Williams, Stephanie Otero, and Stephanie Acosta throughout today's presentation. And it looks like Stephanie has our slides queued up. Thank you very much. So I will now give you a brief overview of what we're going to be going through today. What does our next hour look like? We will mostly be hearing from Gary Williams here in a second, who will be talking about some of the really interesting environmental history here in the border region. We'll have a chance for some Q&A. And then we're going to give you a little bit of background information about how this environmental roundtable came together, what environmental roundtables are hosted through the El Paso Community Foundation. And then we really want to get some feedback from you guys. We've got a wide range of folks from organizations that would be participating into the roundtable, different stakeholders in the region. We're excited to learn from you what are some of the elements and objectives that we should be including in our mission as a new environmental roundtable for the region. So it is now my pleasure to turn our stage over to Gary Williams, who is a senior program officer at the El Paso Community Foundation. I'm sure many of you already know him, and he needs no introduction as a deeply knowledgeable guru of El Paso history, and especially environmental history for the region. If you have questions for Gary during his presentation, please type them into the chat, and we will get to them at the end of his presentation.
Thank you, Meghan. And Candy, I just wanted to give you a shout out and Green Hope Project for pulling 49 presentations together. You've done a phenomenal job. I've tried to be on as many as I could, and there's been some great presentations, so I'm glad to be part of it. And the Community Foundation is glad to be part of this greater effort, so thank you all. You know, this is going to be a bit of a personal presentation because I moved to El Paso in 1969, about 52 years ago to the date, and I've been there pretty much ever since. I got involved pretty quickly as a college student in what I saw in El Paso, and I've sort of selected about 50 years worth of collaboratives and projects and history that's near and dear to me, because I knew a lot of the partners and people, some not with us anymore. So some of you may be closer to some of these. You may have selected other things to focus on, but this is sort of my personal view of things. And I'm going to start with some themes that I selected to thread this together. One is grassroots activism. So I'm a big believer in, especially in El Paso, in the power of us organizing to work together. Secondly, our collaborative partnerships, how important they are when you're trying to move the ball forward on any projects. And so I selected some history that I think encompasses both of those. And then finally, environmental injustice, because we've certainly had a share of that over many, many decades here, as some of you have talked about in your own presentation. So the other thing that I do in my work at the Community Foundation is I have a background in anthropology and social work. And so people are never far from the ecological side of the physical and natural environment and the cultural environment. So I always look at how do we look at that interaction of the natural, cultural, and historical across time, going back, going forward, focusing on today. And so that's the nature of what I'm going to do next. So this slide I chose, Candace, if you can remove leave meeting or continue, that's what I'm seeing on my screen. I wanted you to see this 1854 lithograph. If it doesn't go away, you can still see it. This is Hart's Mill, what we call Oñate Crossing, Old Fort Bliss, and Old Fort and Hart's Mill. In the three buildings, one is still remaining, that's La Hacienda Cafe. And this river scene shows the rapids at the rapids at the turn. At the turn it's making to this day. You have to kind of look carefully, but you see the rapids, and this water was harnessed by Simeon Hart to power his mill, which is the building on the right, to process wheat and corn, which was actually grown locally. So this isolated desert community exists because of the Rio Grande. Water is so critical in the desert. The water is disappearing, as you know, we all know. The channel is drying up. But here is an 1854 lithograph of Simeon Hart's residence on the other bank, is seen by a survey portrait painter from one of the boundary surveys 200 years ago. By this time, when he painted it, Juarez had been in place since 1659, or about 200 years. But of course, Native Americans have relied on this river and hunted and fished and grown food for thousands and thousands of years. So this human interaction at the Pass the North, this is a very important spot. And this shows visually what it looked like during that period. Well, things change. And so this is a bit of a downer, right? So we're out driving around, and if you cross the river channel, if you've looked at the last 21 years, this is a more common sight. So that's the Oregon Mountains looking north. Off in the distance, we have a dry channel. When I moved here in 1969, it would dry up, and back in the 1700s, it would dry up, but not to the extent that it's drying up today. So colleague, Rachel Feit, did a presentation. We're doing a cultural landscape report, historic structures report with the county on Hart's Mill, Old Fort Bliss, Oñate Crossing. And she called it a river used to run through it, which is apt. And I think we're all in agreement the Rio Grande is pressured with drought and climate change and agriculture and human uses upstream. It's diverted, drained, and it's certainly dwindling, and it's really why we're here. One last comment on the previous slide. That crossing of Oñate is the reason we're called El Paso, and so that exercise of his colonists crossing the river was El Paso del Rio del Norte, the action of actually crossing the river of the north at that point. And in 1659, after the 1598 crossing, Paso del Norte was named, and then in 1888, Juarez became Juarez, and El Paso by then had taken the name El Paso. But that's the reason we're named who we are, and the Pass in the North is because of that spot on the planet. And so I wanted to show you that lithograph. So anyway, I'm going to show you a series of slides that show a very different environmental place. This is, if you can see the women sitting and standing, one with an umbrella, you're looking at the Chihuahuan Desert, and you're looking at San Jacinto Plaza. So they're in probably the projection room or the broadcast booth at Southwest University Stadium. All that desert was leveled, and you're looking at adobe corrals. And about 1853, that's San Jacinto Plaza. If you move to the right, you have orchards, you have trees, and then you see off in the distance the river channel moving downstream. And it gives you a glimpse of an oasis in the desert. And food was grown here. It had to be, because the caravans from the south, from Mexico City or Santa Fe, were few and far between. And this isolated desert community had to grow its own food, but it relied on caravans, etc. But this shows the adobe tradition and the bosque in the woods, and you can imagine the fish and animals that existed here, including wolves, bears up in the mountains, etc. This is another view by a French artist. Both of these are at the Museum of Art. This is the Acequia Madre, which has been diverted from across from Hart's Mill at the river. And now you see the railroad, which transformed the adobe architecture, and the population essentially blew up here in 1881. In fact, May of 1881, 5 different railroads arrived within a couple months of each other, including one that served Mexico from up north to Santa Fe. And so this is a view that he painted probably around Avenida Juarez, looking at the Franklins. Again, it shows the river and some natural landscape. This is a 1857 slide, I think, from the Emory. This is a James D. Smiley. And this is looking north toward the Oregons. But again, you can see a deer and some animals in the foreground. This is probably near the river channel at Frontera, near today's Sunland Park and Donovan Drive, maybe a little bit farther north from there, but about that location just north of Hart's Mill, Old Fort Bliss. The river would change course. It was a river. It was a natural water course. It would flood. It would dry up. The floods would create new channels. And this was never a problem until there was a U.S.-Mexico border. And when you settle on a river as your boundary between the U.S. and Mexico and Texas, it does become a problem if the river is all over the place, as it was. And you can see how crazy it was in different channels. And you'll read about this and see this as you try to understand. The good news about a natural river, there's lots of good news, but one is it's depositing silt as it flows along, and that's great for farming. And when you lose those deposits, you're now reverting to a chemical application to grow your food. And it does change your ecosystem dramatically. And the ecosystem, as you can tell from these great art images, has changed dramatically. I think we often do not give the river the credit or appreciation it's due because we've channelized it, as you'll see in a minute, and it's often out of sight. And my own belief is the Franklin Mountains have taken its place as the natural iconic feature of the desert, because we've pushed the desert aside. But we did get to see the beauty of the mountains, but we're not seeing the beauty of the river because it's been so badly transformed, in my opinion. So I'm doing some work on the cultural historical landscape of Fabens, and I found this 1916 map in the National Archives. It shows the river channel and the island that they called the San Elizario Island in this case, but it was a 20-mile long section of Isleta, Socorro, and San Elizario that was separated on both sides by river channel. What's really nice about this, you can see the squares are fields of corn and alfalfa, and the map is also marked bosque. This was 1916, so for all intents and purposes, this is the end of the natural river cycle in our valley, because the next slide is going to show you Elephant Butte Dam. So the dam is constructed in 1916, and they were going to construct it in the upper valley, our upper valley, but decided to move it upstream. I think one of the trade-offs was El Paso supplied all the cement. So where the Portland cement plant is to this day, all of that rock was quarried out opposite the dino tracks. All that was quarried for cement buildings by Trost downtown, but also for the cement in Elephant Butte and Caballo dams. And that canyon that was very narrow and precipitous that the river ran through was quarried out on the east side as it flowed north and south. So there's Elephant Butte, and that's cement from El Paso. So this is October 1936, and when I moved here, this is what the river looked like most of the year, very rarely. I mean, I remember it drying up, but this is around Smeltertown up near the American Dam, looking downstream. This is in October, so the snow melt is in the spring, right? So look at the volume of water it's carrying in the channel. That channel exists today. If we went out there today, we're not going to see anything like that. And by October, it's dwindled to a trickle. But what they did in 36 is they took all of the bends in the river and straightened those in a rectification project to make this as efficient a carrier of water for agriculture as they could, and to prevent the flooding. I get it, but what did exist. So what do you do? I mean, I'm always asking the question, when things happen, what can we do? So here's a great example of a terrific initiative by the city and UTEP to find a way to take one of these old bends in the river near Socorro and transform it, with the suggestion of U.S. Fish and Wildlife, to a wetlands. So this has its own history, and John Sproul may not be on the call, but to give credit to UTEP, the Center for Environmental Resource Management, to the city, which got this as a park, to everybody, you'll see the partners in a minute, and to take what was essentially just dirt with no water and spend 25 years to get it looking like it does on the left, it is really a huge statement. And you can see the partners involved, mostly public, but Ducks Unlimited, certainly a private nonprofit, and a labor of love for John Sproul and the gang at UTEP and CERN. So hats off to them. It's 372 acres. Every year it gets better. It is a way to bring back what I was showing you that is lost. And next slide, my own recommendation, and this came out of Bill Clinton, President Clinton's, he signed an executive order to make the Rio Grande an American Heritage River, and to look at the opportunity to go regionally with an ecosystem so that the Gulf of Mexico, where the river flows to or used to from Colorado, there's a series of these wetland areas that are developed for the birds to migrate as they have for thousands of years. And my own belief is Bosque del Apache is a great example of something that's been in place long-term since the 1930s. But Rio Bosque Wetlands is a great example of a smaller space that is taking on that kind of regional significance. But these regional looks at how we tie the ecological similarities of a river system and do what we can to regenerate this flyway that's ancient is important. And I would say the work of La Frontera Land Alliance to get private owners to do it and to get people to do this in small ways is as important as doing it on the grander scale. And it is one opportunity to take a look at restoring and regenerating what we used to have. The second aspect, because of work with local food systems, we used to grow so much more variety of food here and food for local production. And that has been lost over the decades since the railroads and refrigerated trucks, et cetera. El Paso is not growing nearly enough of its own food, but that's beginning to change. And so, ironically, this is Bodega Loya. This is Marty and Ralph Loya's operation of organic farming. And probably as the crow flies, this is maybe a mile or two from Rio Bosque Wetlands there in historic Socorro. So there is the beginning, the last 5 or 6 years of a community food movement between La Semilla and Sierra Vista growers and Jardín del Milagro up in the Upper Valley, and the work that is being done by Desert Spoon to connect growers to consumers and to start producing food that we used to produce as a way to regenerate this river valley and to produce food that doesn't have to be imported from such a great distance. So healthy food that's locally produced has got to be a goal, and it's one way to regenerate both culture and have these historical tie-ins to this valley that I'm speaking of. So just an example of what this is, a KTSM story that was featured last week. And The county is involved with grants, and folks are working hard on this. And we do this connection a lot with local food systems with our Cultivate forum that we do every couple of months. And we'll start again. So the desert, beautiful, beautiful, diverse desert, as we all know. Everybody on this call knows how beautiful it is. It has not necessarily been well treated in El Paso. Certainly the Franklin Mountains, which I'm going to talk about in a second, is a miraculous story. But we all know, and we know that sprawl has had a tremendous impact on the desert as this community has sprawled and moved away from the downtown central core. That needs to be changed. It simply is not viable over a longer period of time, and it's certainly not good just to bulldoze your ecosystem, just saying. Again, I think we know what the Chihuahuan Desert looks like and where most of it is, but that's where we live, and it needs to be protected and it needs to be celebrated. A lot of you on this call do that. So back in the 1970s, developers acquired much of what we're looking at in this photo, looking north toward the Oregon Mountains. And the community really became alarmed at the encroaching development, and in particular, the developers that were looking at everything from a Jeep road that they bulldozed to North Franklin to people living all over what is now Franklin Mountain State Park. And there was an intersection of myself. I was living at the developers' apartments below the tramway, and we would occasionally have a beer together. I was much younger. And he actually offered me a job to drive the Jeeps up to North Franklin. And I told Dick Knapp, I said, Dick, I'm not going to drive the Jeep. I'm really trying to stop you from doing this. And so, that's my little insight into the developer. I'll never forget that. But I turned the job down. I didn't drive the Jeep, happy to hike the road, which is disappearing. So this is a couple maps from Alex Apostolides' 1990 book on the Franklin Mountains. And you can see on the one on the right that what the saving of the 24,000 acres did was it allowed El Paso to connect to public lands north of us and to create a wildlife corridor and a corridor that now connects to Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks Monument. Hopefully we'll get a monument, and all this can be further tied together. And all of this happened because of the folks that I'm going to show you from Alex's book. I don't think there's enough information. I'm working on a history of this effort that I want to feature at the new visitor center. But this is really the most miraculous project I have ever seen in El Paso. This is beyond belief how this group of organizations and individuals were able to work together and get the legislature to find $9 million to buy about 24,000 acres of desert and making it, I think, the largest park in an urban area in the United States. And some of the folks are gone. Some are still with us. Some are in their 80s. And so we're doing some memorialization of that effort to get that done. And it's important that people's efforts, especially if they're this significant, are recognized. And then there's a whole cast of folks that carried on after this, because once the park was purchased in '79, it had no staff, and it languished a bit until about 1989, and folks have picked up the ball from there. So this needs to be featured where people understand the good work that was done. This does not happen every day. There's 90 state parks and Texas Parks and Wildlife. I do not believe I know one that had to fight so hard for its park. And El Paso should, be proud of what happened. Recycling, well, we're not there yet, but there's a backstory to what we have. We've got blue bin issues. Well, we're going to solve them, right? It's education. We don't have green compost yet. We got to get that. But something starts everywhere. is where did it begin in El Paso? So again, the Sierra Club and its folks, Wes Leonard, John Sproul, others, were involved in this story is really one twofold. Jimmy Carter, President Carter, had a passionate belief in alternative energy for fossil fuels. So El Paso, the city applied and got a demonstration grant for an El Paso Energy Center. This building still exists at 800 South Piedras. So President Carter, we got the grant, the city hired an architect. He did a rendering. They built a Adobe really cool building to provide information and have passive solar. It was really well designed. It's still standing. And up it goes, and that's what it looks like today. Mago Gandara, an artist, I know Candace loves the intersection of art and environment as I do, did a beautiful mural called Senor Sol, that was Mr. Sun, that wraps around the building. And then President Carter was replaced by Ronald Reagan. They took his solar panels off the White House and they ended the program, and El Paso closed it. It languished, it got tagged, it was run down. The Sierra Club came back, and with a grant, we repurposed it as an environmental center to do the city's recycling. And so this recycling program as we know it began in the fenced areas to the left and right of this property, and people would drive their recyclables down and volunteers would get them to the city, including glass, which we would haul over to Fort Bliss. So if you ever see John Sproul, and if you want to know who was transporting glass, it was John. So people like John and others manned this as a volunteer, and we used it. This is a city-owned recycling drop-off. They then went to parking lots and expanded the program, and they eventually went to curbside recycling. So this began in the 1980s. The mural was done in '82. And under Mayor Susie Azar, we got it fixed up, rehabilitated, and reopened. It's now a restaurant, if it's still open, 800 South Piedras. Mago is no longer with us. Wonderful artist, terrific person. And this is her Senor Sol. So she would call us to make sure if the building was in a down state that the mural was taken care of. I have the files. And, you know, you want to take care of what people do that preceded us by recognizing their work and at least being aware of what they did. This says I want people to care, and in this case about recycling in her lovely mural. So we have recycling today. Again, we've got a ways to go, but that's really, in my opinion, where it began with individual activism. The tin can lady, Mildred Smith, was an older woman who pushed recycling very early on in the 70s and 80s in El Paso. And again, this grassroots feel that you get is really how things happen. So good for everybody for getting together and collaborating. This is a comical but not comical take on a really unbelievable situation that went from 1992 to 2001. So, you know, we're all tied together on this planet. So the feds say to New York City, you're not taking billions of pounds of sludge, human waste, and you're not going to dump it in the Atlantic Ocean anymore. Stop. So they have to stop. So where do they put it? Well, we don't know. So they look for contractors and they decide to put it on a train, and they look for a poor, isolated community near us, Sierra Blanca, and say, hey, how about them? And so the trains begin to roll, probably the quickest permitting process in the history of the state of Texas, allowed this to happen less than 30 days or 3 weeks, and 45 trains, thousands of pounds of material, wet sludge, named the Poo-Poo Choo-Choo, began to roll from New York City west, 2,000 miles to Sierra Blanca, where it is flung around the desert. So If you want to see the video, this is from a show called TV Nation with Michael Moore, and I took some stills. There's the mountain at Sierra Blanca, and there's the sludge that's been delivered from New York being spread by tractor over 81,000 acres of land. This went on for 9 years, and it was finally stopped. And again, this is, when I moved here in 1969, to give you some sense, El Paso was using human sludge. It used to be down at the Delta site, and you could use it in your garden, but because of heavy metals and other contamination, it stopped. So we always wondered how this got permitted because of the contamination and everything else. So it was not a good thing. It still continues. I think trains go to Alabama, but they stopped going to Sierra Blanca. Well, if that's not bad enough, I have a chat. I can send a link to the YouTube video for the Michael Moore TV Nation is what it's called. That's the August 2nd, 1994 edition. If you look up on YouTube, it's season 3 TV Nation. You can watch the whole video. It's quite something. There was a huge lawsuit by the company that did this work, and they sued Sony and everybody you can think of over that show. Well, next we have low-level radioactive waste. So back in the 80s, real quickly, the state of Texas was getting ready to do a compact with Vermont and Maine to dispose of low-level radioactive waste together as a 3-state compact. So Texas started looking for sites. They got pushback south of San Antonio. So they rewrote their rules and said, well, we're not going to be near any open water. So let's just go west where there is no surface water. That's our way. So they started in Del City. And oh, by the way, we've purchased water rights, El Paso Water, below Del City. That's eventually how we'll get fresh water here. And that was where it was slated first, but the hydrology and geology pushed it out of Del City in the 80s. Then it went to Fort Hancock. It was pushed out for the same reason. And activists from Mexico brought in the La Paz Treaty, and Mexico pushed back. Well, then it went to Sierra Blanca. It was pushed back by everything from bridge protests to marches to activism on both sides of the border, but it's not over. That ended in 98, and they went to Andrews, Texas. And as predicted, we felt that once this happened, it would open the door for high-level radioactive waste. That's the issue now over near Midland, Odessa, and that's become contested as well. And so you have these environmental justice issues, and this one, poor Sierra Blanca, had this happening. So that's another story. Air quality, good news, bad news. The good news was I could not find a slide of the 80s and 90s. If you lived here, I am telling you, it was about as bad as anything I've ever seen. The inversions during the winter, this shows some of that. There was batteries and tires being burned in Juarez to fire brick kilns, and Carlos Rincon, now heads up the EPA, was in the Environmental Defense Fund. He collaborated on both sides of the border, did wonderful work with his partners to get the air shed better. We still struggle. This is a shot near Asarco, which is gone. And I just wanted to end it with a concluding slide, and then I'm going to stop. I've gone way over. So I really believe political action, civic engagement are just so important for reciprocity with the land. These efforts have got to be sustained by people over the long term. Often there are fights that occur, and then the fight ends, but the fight really doesn't ever end. And then finally, as I mentioned, regional solutions and holistic approaches are just so critical. So thank you all for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. That was awesome. Were there any questions for Gary you wanted to type into the chat or raise your hand real quick? We do have just a couple of minutes for questions. I know Judy had asked Gary if it would be possible to get a hold of your slides or some of the content from them besides the recording.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Awesome.
Yes. Thank you.
I do have one quick question for you. If anything else comes in, I'll ask it as well. But with your deep, comprehensive working knowledge of El Paso environmental history, if you were to issue one piece of advice for our future environmental leaders in El Paso for high school and undergraduate students today, they're going to be living here long term and impacting the future of El Paso, what would it be?
Vote and get engaged in the civic process, and just be aware of where you live and how important it is to protect it. So be good citizens. That would be it.
Awesome. I've always been a big fan of viewing science and science education, environmental education as a way to build citizenship. I think a lot of these things feed into each other really well. Thank you so much, Gary. And we are now going to transition in our talk to talk a little bit about this new environmental roundtable. I'm going to give you just a very brief overview of how this whole thing came to be, and then we're going to turn it over to Stephanie Otero to talk a little bit about roundtables that are hosted by the El Paso Community Foundation. So Insights El Paso Science Center, I think most of you guys know Insights has been around in El Paso for 40 years or so. During the last 4 years, as a completely mobile museum now, we have been building a wide range of different outreach programs to share hands-on STEM and environmental education programs with the community. And in doing so, we have worked with many of you here on the call today on a variety of different projects, whether they are our own projects or some of your projects. We've been collaborating with many, many different organizations. And through these conversations, one of the themes that keeps reemerging is this overarching need within our community to have some sort of a formal structure to support collaboration amongst different environmental organizations and especially environmental education providers within the region. And so, with Insights and with some of the other organizations, we have participated in other kind of collaborative backbone organizations like the Cultural Roundtable, which was also hosted by the Community Foundation. We've participated in the Boost Network and the new STEM ecosystem, and we've seen some of the fruits that have come forward with those different collaborative organizations to really serve our community better with a stronger collective impact. And so to that end, we worked with a number of the different organizations here today to host 3 initial meetings. We invited everybody we could think of, from land managers to outdoor recreation providers to conservation groups to educators, to talk about this need for some sort of a formal infrastructure or group to support collaboration amongst these different groups. And so far, these meetings have been successful. We've been meeting since, I believe, late 2020, and in these first 3 meetings that we've had participation from over 25 different organizations. We have discussed whether or not these different groups and organizations are interested in having some sort of an infrastructure, and the answer has been a resounding yes. Yes, we want something. We want something to support communication and collaboration amongst our groups. We've discussed a little bit about the scope of this group and what it should be, and the consensus so far has been that it should be a pretty broad scope. And so we are looking to encompass environmental education organizations, environmental specific organizations, conservation focused organizations, outdoor recreation organizations, land managers, municipalities, any folks with a vested interest in environmental projects and education. And we are looking at a broad scope of reaching out and impacting families, teachers, K-12 students, undergraduates, and keeping just generally kind of a broad scope to this initiative. Some of the potential projects that this roundtable organization might be supporting based on some of the initial feedback during meetings have included the need for shared promotional materials for different organizations, working to better support large collaborative public events like the Chihuahuan Desert Fiesta, or, for example, this environmental summit. We've looked at surveying K-12 teachers to see what they need from environmental organizations, and being able to provide centralized directories of our combined resources for educators to these teachers. There are many, many more projects that we could potentially embark on, and that's part of what we want to hear from you all today. So before we open the floor for your feedback, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Otero, who's going to give you a little bit more information about the El Paso Community Foundation's roundtables.
So following Gary and Meghan is like a tall task. That was so interesting. And so I'll keep my remarks very brief because we really want to hear from you. My name is Stephanie Otero. I work for the El Paso Community Foundation. And in the past few years, we've really stepped up to be the backbone organization for a series of collective impact work. And, you know, collaboration, collective impact, grassroots working together, these are not new concepts, but there were sort of two reasons that we sort of stepped up to offer our services. One, across the nation, we are seeing a change in philanthropy, especially big, large national and state foundations who are no longer interested in funding siloed single efforts, but really want to have a larger impact with their dollars. And so they want to see within a community organizations coming together to create a larger collective impact across that region. And we wanted to make sure that the amazing organizations that work in El Paso, all of you on the call here today, as well as in other areas, had the ability to come together and be competitive nationally and statewide at reaching those philanthropic dollars. The other piece of it is that each of you in your organizations typically is always understaffed, and you do the important work. You guys are the experts. You guys have the passion. You do all the work. What we take on is all the administrative pieces of collective impact work that you and your staffs don't have time to do. You know, meeting reminders, minutes, following up on things to get the work moving forward. And we've had great success with several roundtables that we've already convened. One, as Meghan mentioned, was the Cultural Roundtable. They, and really just to be clear, each roundtable picks its initiatives. We are not dictating anything. We are literally your support so that you guys can reach the goals that you set for yourselves. So the Cultural Roundtable members wanted the teachers in our public schools to better understand all the offerings that they had for students and teachers. And so what they came up with is an educator night. So the Community Foundation took all the logistic and operational pieces to pull together an educator night where we brought hundreds of teachers from all over the region to downtown El Paso to visit every cultural institution that offers field trips or engagements in the school. And it was just resounding success. There were so many teachers that had no idea what was available to them. Another example is our Animal Roundtable, brought together both domestic and wildlife to improve the animal welfare in our community. And one of the issues they have is that even within themselves, they don't always know where to refer. If you find a hurt turtle or you find a hurt rabbit, you know, especially animals that are not dogs and cats, what do you do? And so they came up with the idea of the Animal 915, and it's literally an information sheet. If you find this is where you call. We distribute it to vets. And again, the Community Foundation produced it and took care of the legwork to get it out into the community. There were vets that weren't even sure where some of these animals would go. And so really what it's about is us taking all of the little everyday work that if it doesn't move your work forward, and taking that on so that you all can focus on the larger collective priorities that you set for yourselves, as well as, of course, the individual work that you do amongst your own organizations. And so Meghan began this work. We're going to come in and help support what Insight started and give the administrative support behind. But we want to hear from the greater community, whether your organization or you're a student and teacher and don't belong to an organization yet, what you see as the needs within the broad scope of environment that you think that the Roundtable should think about when it's starting its initial priorities. And let me tell you that one of the things that we always share with the Roundtables, the hardest thing to do is pick a few priorities to start with, because there are so many things that are important to you all and so many things that need to be done in our community. And so we always say that the priorities are not which priority is more important, but just an order in which we start tackling all the work that we need to do to better our community. So Stephanie Acosta is going to pull up something for us to collaborate on. And I'm going to ask a question, and whether you want to put your camera on or not, we would like you guys to come off mute. You've been listening to everybody else, although Gary is super interesting. I learn so much every time I hear him speak. And I want you to share your answers. If you feel comfortable enough, we'd like you to speak them out loud. If you're not so comfortable, you can put them in the chat. But the first thing we'd like you to think about is, what should be key words in our shared mission vision statement for the Roundtable? So what are words that come to mind that should be part of our mission vision statement? And I'll throw out one to get us started, which probably is on the tip, and actually Sarah already put it in the chat: collaboration. So we'll start there. I'll open the chat so I can read it, but I also encourage you all to turn off your mics and start throwing out some words. Sustainable.
Education.
And one unique way to participate and see your words on the screen is you can open a new window on your computer and go to menti.com. And when you input this code, you'll be able to submit your keywords with us. And that way we can see it populate on the screen for all of us to see. You can also do this on your phone. So if you want to stay looking at Zoom on your computer, on your cell phone, if you go to your internet and you go to menti.com, it will populate a code which you can put here, 6051-0927.
If you're unable to access the Menti, I'm definitely always technically challenged. You can also continue to put words in the chat, and we're happy to write them in so you see in real time your comments coming in.
Thank you all. So it looks like we have lots of submissions of collaboration and sustainable, because those are of larger font here as the submissions are being shown live. If everyone has had a chance to submit their questions, also in the chat we have regeneration from Gary, equity, access, open, educating our youth, climate justice. And we will share these results with the Environmental Roundtable for their next meeting. So I want to make sure that you all know all of your input will be taken into much thought and consideration for the Roundtable to follow up on for the development of the mission statement. Cross-border collaboration, absolutely. Environmental justice, impact. So I will move on to one more question that we have for you all.
And it'll work the same way. So as I mentioned before, it's really important when you think of priorities not to think of it in terms of one is more important to the other. But what are you thinking are the 3 priorities we should tackle first? Because there's probably more than 3 things on every single person's mind in this group of all the important work that we need to do in our community. So if you had to pick 3 things that you thought a collective impact model should tackle in our community, what should those 3 priorities be?
You're also welcome to input this in the chat.
One of the reasons I was late getting here is because I didn't know at 3 o'clock, I figured, I didn't get invited. So I was teaching my grandkids how to catch antlion and what that was all about. But until we can change the way people think around here about respecting everything and teaching their kids and teaching them, we're going to have garbage in the desert. We're going to have, most of the problems y'all just brought up as got to start, at home. There was too much to type.
So I put respect the environment, Michael. I hope that encompasses your thoughts.
Starting at home, you got to respect the environment, and that doesn't happen anymore. I'm a hunter too, and a lot of people disagree with that. But if it wasn't for us, a lot of the wildlife would not have an environment anymore. We raised more hell about the wall because it blocked all, water off to the wildlife on our side. And they didn't think about that stuff.
Great thoughts. Thank you for sharing, Michael. And Stephanie, I'm assuming you're capturing because it only lets me do 3. So there's a whole bunch of other thoughts I want to make sure we capture that are in the chat. I'm hoping that we are taking pictures of that or something.
We are, absolutely. And we will also have a chance to export our results so they are saved.
Good.
This is awesome, guys.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention out loud, if I could, just the idea of cross-border collaboration, making sure that El Paso efforts in the region connects with efforts that are across the border in Juarez and such. And that's sort of something I'm really interested in. So I wanted to throw it in there.
That's fantastic, Kevin. And I think one of the things could be great is if you guys could start to share contacts of people that you've worked with in Juarez so we can invite them. I mean, we love in-person meetings, but one of the nice things that we've discovered in our COVID hibernation is that it's easier to pull people together into a meeting. So we would love for you guys to share some initial contacts in Juarez. We always say our roundtables are inclusive, not exclusive. We're not looking for some set amount of people. We want to bring everybody to the table, but we don't know everybody that needs to be at that table. So we encourage you, if you know some people right now, you can stick it in the chat, or I believe Stephanie Acosta put our contact information and maybe she can share it again, and you can email us people you'd like us to reach out to.
And I'd like to add too that I'm a board member for Texas Association for Environmental Ed, just got the vice president of that. And so I can go through our network and deliver what I can to you by any of these means as well. And we have a meeting soon, so I'll reach out for that.
That is fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, whatever we can do.
Thank you, Kevin. That's a really important point, and that was one of the biggest drivers behind forming this organization. Is just our geographic isolation here in the border region. There are centralized groups within Texas and then also northern New Mexico, and a lot of those environmental education organizations, they just don't reach us out here in the border region. So,
and I know I haven't been there very long, but for years it's been, gosh, we just don't it's so far away. And I'm like, well, I really like it out there, so I'll do what I can to go out there and see if we could collaborate more.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I have to head out, but I just want to say thank you for hosting this, and I'm really excited to see what we come up with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We really appreciate all the input. This was fantastic. We are very excited to partner with all of you and help raise the work that each of your individual organizations are doing up into the community, and hopefully see some success stories that Gary shared today, like the Franklin Mountains, in our very foreseeable future. And Megan, are you closing us out? I'm not sure, or is...
I can close us out, or Candy can close us out. And
No, I mean, you guys, this is amazing. I think it's a start. And so just a quick question. If anybody would like to continue with these endeavors for future meetings, Stephanie, what advice would you give them so that this isn't just a one meeting off and that's it?
Sure. So Stephanie Acosta put her email address in the chat. She can do it again. Reach out to her if you have not, especially if you've not been on Megan's list of sort of the grassroots start to this, and also happily share out colleagues that you think we should reach out to. Stephanie and I will be following up with everybody as we prepare for a June meeting. Do we have a date? Stephanie Acosta, I should know it, but can you help me?
We'd actually like to be inclusive and work with people's schedules. So the date is to be determined. And please send me an email and I'll make sure that you get a follow-up.
Awesome. So like they said, the information's in the chat. If you would like to be a part of future meetings, or if you'd like to contribute to that master database about who else should be involved, please send them an email. If you are listening to this later and you do not have access to the chat, that will be through Stephanie Acosta, and it will be sacosta@epcf.org. So YouTube, if you're listening and you'd like to be a part of this as well, please reach out. And guys, Gary, thank you for the history of your knowledge, because I think that if we don't keep passing this on, it gets lost. And when things get lost, we repeat, and that's awful. And thank you to all of you that have tuned in on a weekday at 4 or 5, whatever time you're at, because without you guys caring, we would be talking to ourselves, and that would be just a little crazy. So we thank you for coming, and we hope there's going to be many, many more of these events. I think having diverse perspective is what going to make us stronger, right? So there's not one perspective throughout history. I mean, collaboratively, I think we're going to be stronger united. So you guys are awesome. We love you. We're going to save the world. We'll start with our area. We'll do it a little bit at a time, right? But thank you so much, guys. And the recording will be made available later. All right. Have a great afternoon or evening. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you, Candy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.